This story was sent to me by Marcus Chen via email. I thought I was being paranoid when I noticed the same black sedan following me for 3 weeks straight. Turns out, paranoia might have saved my life. But let me back up and tell you how this all started. I'm a data analyst for a mid-sized tech company in Seattle. Nothing glamorous, just crunchy numbers and generating reports. About 6 months ago, I was assigned to work on a government contract analyzing traffic patterns for the Department of Transportation. It seemed routine enough: optimize routes, reduce congestion, typical bureaucratic stuff. I had security clearance for the project, signed all the NDAs, followed protocol to the letter. The work itself was mind-numbing at first. Thousands of data points about vehicle movements, timing patterns, GPS coordinates. But after a few weeks, I started noticing something odd. The data wasn't just tracking traffic flow, it was tracking specific vehicles. License plates, make and model information, even passenger counts. When I dug deeper, I found routing information that had nothing to do with traffic optimization. These were surveillance routes. I brought my concerns to my supervisor, thinking there might be some mistake in the data sets I'd been given. She brushed it off, said I was probably looking at old law enforcement data that got mixed in by accident. But when I went back to double-check, entire folders had been moved or deleted from the server. Files I'd been working with just hours before were gone. That's when I made the mistake of copying some of the remaining data to my personal drive. I told myself I was just being cautious, documenting what I'd found in case there were questions later. I had no idea I'd just painted a target on my back. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning. I was getting coffee at my usual spot when I noticed a man in a gray suit reading a newspaper at a corner table. Nothing unusual, except I'd seen the exact same guy at the same coffee shop the day before, wearing the same suit, reading the same newspaper. When I looked closer, I realized he wasn't actually reading. His eyes kept flicking up to watch me. Over the next few days, the surveillance became more obvious, like they wanted me to know I was being watched. The black sedan parked across from my apartment building, different people following me on foot, but always maintaining that professional distance. My phone started acting up, calls dropping randomly, texts arriving hours late, weird clicking sounds during conversations. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, but then my internet history started showing searches I'd never made. Queries about data encryption, government whistleblower protection, secure communication methods. Someone was not just watching me, they were actively manipulating my digital footprint, making it look like I was planning something I wasn't. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. I was working late at the office, trying to finish up some legitimate projects before the weekend, when I heard voices in the hallway. Through my office door's frosted glass, I could see silhouettes of at least 3 people talking to my supervisor. One of them was definitely the gray suit guy from the coffee shop. My blood went cold when I heard my name mentioned, followed by phrases like security risk and unauthorized access. I quietly gathered my things and slipped out through the emergency exit, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my car keys in the parking garage. Driving home, I kept checking my mirrors. The black sedan was there, following at a distance but making no effort to hide itself. When I pulled into my apartment complex, I saw another car already waiting in the visitor spaces. 2 men in dark clothing got out and started walking toward the building entrance. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour diner across town and sat in a back booth, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't go to the police. What was I going to tell them? That the government was watching me because I'd accidentally discovered they were tracking civilians?
I had no proof, and worse, I was probably technically guilty of violating my security clearance by copying those files. Around 3 a.m., I made the decision that probably saved my life. I drove to the nearest FedEx office and mailed copies of everything I'd found to 3 different journalists, along with a detailed letter explaining the situation. Then I destroyed my personal copies and threw my phone in a dumpster. The next morning, I showed up at my office like nothing had happened. My supervisor barely looked at me when she told me the DOT contract had been restructured and my services were no longer needed on that project. The relief on her face was obvious. She knew exactly what kind of situation I'd stumbled into. For weeks afterwards, I continued seeing signs of surveillance, but gradually it decreased. The black sedan stopped showing up. The mystery searches in my browser history went back to normal. It was like they decided I wasn't worth the trouble once I was off the project. 6 months later, one of those journalists published a story about illegal domestic surveillance programs using transportation data as cover. The article was buried on page 6 and didn't get much attention, but it vindicated everything I'd experienced. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't mailed those files, if I had just kept quiet and tried to pretend I hadn't seen anything. I still check my mirrors when I'm driving, and I never use the same coffee shop 2 days in a row. Some habits are hard to break when you've learned how easily your own government can decide you're a problem that needs to be solved.
I found this on a Reddit thread by user TruthSeeker2019. The job interview seemed too good to be true, and I should have trusted that instinct. A government research position with a salary twice what I was making, full benefits, and they were specifically recruiting people with my psychology background. The red flags were there from the beginning, but I was desperate enough to ignore them. The interview was held in an unmarked office building downtown, the kind of place that could house anything from insurance companies to tech startups. The waiting room was sterile white, with no magazines, no decorations, nothing that would tell you what kind of organization this was. Even the receptionist seemed nervous, like she wasn't entirely sure what she was supposed to be doing there. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison was the woman who interviewed me. Mid-50s, perfectly pressed suit, the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She asked standard interview questions at first, my experience with behavioral analysis, my familiarity with statistical modeling, my comfort level with confidential research. But then the questions got weird. She wanted to know about my family relationships, whether I had close friends, how I handled isolation. She asked hypothetical scenarios about loyalty conflicts, what I would do if I discovered research that contradicted my personal beliefs. When I asked what specific type of research I'd be doing, she gave vague answers about behavioral modification techniques and social compliance studies. Despite the strange interview, they offered me the job on the spot. The starting date was immediate. They wanted me to begin the following Monday. The salary was even higher than advertised, and they were offering a signing bonus that would cover my student loans. Against my better judgment, I accepted. The facility where I'd be working was a 2-hour drive outside the city, a complex of low concrete buildings surrounded by security fencing. My ID badge got me through 3 separate checkpoints before I finally reached my assigned building. Inside, the hallways were lined with identical doors, each marked only with numbers. No nameplates, no department signs, nothing to indicate what happened behind any of those doors. My supervisor was Dr. James Parker. a thin man with hollow eyes who spoke in monotone sentences like he was reading from a script. He explained that I'd be analyzing data from voluntary behavioral studies conducted on various population samples. The research was classified, he said, but I'd have access to anonymized results and video recordings of test subjects. The work area was a windowless room with a single computer terminal and a stack of files marked with security classifications I'd never seen before. The first batch of data I was given involved something called Project Mindbridge, apparently a study of how people respond to different types of psychological pressure in controlled environments. The videos were disturbing from the start. Test subjects who appeared to be homeless individuals were placed in isolation chambers and subjected to various stimuli: flashing lights, repetitive sounds, recorded voices giving conflicting instructions. I was supposed to analyze their behavioral responses, document when they showed signs of confusion or distress, and identify which techniques were most effective at producing compliance behaviors. I told myself these people had volunteered, that they were being compensated for their participation, but as I watched more footage, it became clear that many of the subjects had no idea what they'd agreed to. Some appeared to be suffering from mental illness or substance abuse issues. Others seemed desperate enough to agree to anything for money. The worst part was the follow-up interviews. Researchers would ask the subjects questions about their experience, but the questions were designed to make them doubt their own memories. Are you sure that's what happened? Could you have imagined that? Don't you think you might be confused? Watching people question their own reality in real time was nauseating. After 2 weeks, I was assigned to analyze data from something called Project Gaslamp. This involved subjects who had been recruited for what they thought were marketing focus groups or psychological studies at local universities. Instead, they were being exposed to experimental drugs without their knowledge, substances added to their drinking water or delivered through aerosol systems in the testing rooms. The goal was to study how these compounds affected decision-making, trust levels, and susceptibility to suggestion. Researchers would give subjects false information about current events or their personal histories, then document how readily they accepted these lies as truth. The drugs made people more compliant, more willing to believe whatever they were told. I started having trouble sleeping, knowing that somewhere people were being used as human test subjects for psychological manipulation techniques that would probably be used on a larger scale. When I tried to discuss my concerns with Dr. Parker, he reminded me of the confidentiality agreements I'd signed and suggested I focus on the data analysis rather than the broader implications of the research. That's when I realized I wasn't just analyzing data, I was helping them perfect these techniques. My recommendations about which approaches were most effective were being used to design more efficient ways to manipulate and control people. I was complicit in something that violated every ethical principle I'd learned in my psychology training. I started documenting everything I could without triggering security protocols. I used the bathroom breaks to memorize project names, researcher identities, and procedural details. I couldn't remove any physical evidence from the facility, but I could take the information in my head. My plan was to finish out the week and then quit, claiming personal reasons or a family emergency. But on Thursday, Dr. Parker called me into his office for what he said was a routine check-in. The questions he asked were almost identical to the ones I'd been analyzing in the Project Gaslamp videos, designed to make me question my own perceptions and doubt my concerns about the research. He knew. Somehow they'd figured out that I was having ethical problems with the work, and now they were using their own techniques on me. The conversation left me feeling disoriented and confused, exactly the way the test subjects looked in those videos. That evening, I didn't go home. I drove straight to the local FBI field office and requested to speak with someone about human rights violations. The agent who interviewed me was polite but skeptical, especially when I couldn't provide any physical evidence of what I'd witnessed. He took my statement and said they'd look into it, but his tone suggested he thought I was either lying or delusional. 2 days later, my employment was terminated for failure to adapt to the research environment. The official paperwork cited personality conflicts and inability to handle classified material appropriately. When I tried to collect my final paycheck, I was told there were discrepancies in my personnel file that needed to be resolved first. I never got that paycheck, and I never heard back from the FBI agent. 6 months later, I saw a news story about the facility being closed due to budget restructuring, but no mention of any investigation or wrongdoing. Sometimes I wonder if those people in the videos ever found out what really was done to them, or if they're still living with implanted memories and altered brain chemistry, never knowing why their lives took the turns they did. The worst part is knowing that whatever they learned from those experiments, they didn't just throw away the data when they shut down the facility. That research is somewhere, being used by someone, and there's nothing I can do to stop it.
Someone DM'd me this on Twitter. The town meeting seemed normal enough at first, just another boring municipal gathering where they discuss budget allocations and road repairs. I'd only gone because my neighbor had been complaining about the new cell tower they were planning to install near our subdivision. She'd asked me to come for moral support, and honestly, I didn't have anything better to do on a Tuesday evening. Hillcrest is one of those small towns where everyone knows everyone. The kind of place where the biggest news is usually someone's cow getting loose or the high school football team making it to regionals. Population about 3,000, mostly families who've lived there for generations. Not the kind of place you'd expect to become the center of a government experiment. The meeting was held in the old community center, maybe 50 people scattered across folding chairs that probably dated back to the 1980s. Mayor Patterson was running things, same as he had for the past 15 years. The agenda looked standard: discuss the new stop sign on Maple Street, approve funding for library renovations, review the cell tower proposal. But when they got to the cell tower discussion, something felt off. The representative from the telecommunications company wasn't some local contractor or regional manager. He was a federal agent. Not that he introduced himself that way, but I recognized the type from my time in the military. The pressed suit, the way he stood, the careful way he answered questions without really saying anything. Agent Williams, as he called himself, explained that this was a special infrastructure project designed to improve emergency communications in rural areas. The tower would be larger than typical cell towers, with additional equipment for enhanced signal processing. When someone asked about health concerns, he assured everyone that all equipment met federal safety standards and that there was absolutely no risk to residents. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor who dragged me to the meeting, raised her hand to ask about the unusual frequency ranges listed on the installation permits. Agent Williams smiled and said those were technical specifications that were too complex to explain to non-engineers, but that everything had been approved by the appropriate regulatory agencies. That's when I noticed the other agents. 3 men in identical dark suits sitting in the back row, not taking notes or participating in the discussion, just watching. One of them had a small device in his hand that he kept checking, like he was monitoring something. Their presence felt wrong in such a casual, small-town setting. The vote to approve the tower passed easily, not surprising since the project came with a substantial payment to the town that would cover the budget shortfall they'd been struggling with all year. But as people filed out after the meeting, I overheard one of the agents talking quietly into a phone about Phase 1 implementation and baseline readings. Over the next few weeks, construction on the tower moved faster than any municipal project I'd ever seen. Heavy equipment arrived daily, along with workers who didn't seem to be from any local companies. They worked odd hours, often through the night, with bright floodlights illuminating the construction site. When curious residents tried to get closer, security guards politely but firmly turned them away. The strange symptoms started about a month after the tower went live. At first, it was just little things that people didn't connect. Headaches that came and went at regular intervals, trouble concentrating during certain times of day, vivid dreams that multiple people seemed to be having simultaneously. Dr. Martinez at the local clinic noted an uptick in patients complaining of sleep disturbances and anxiety, but attributed it to seasonal changes. I might not have noticed the pattern if I hadn't been keeping a journal for my own sleep issues. Every few days, I'd wake up feeling disoriented and foggy, like I'd been drugged. When I compared my symptoms with my neighbors, I found we were all experiencing these episodes on the same nights, usually lasting from around 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. That's when I started paying attention to the tower. During those early morning hours when people were reporting symptoms, additional lights would activate on the structure. Not the standard aircraft warning lights, but arrays of equipment that seemed to pulse in synchronized patterns. I could see them from my bedroom window, strobing in sequences that didn't look random. I wasn't the only one who noticed. A group of residents started meeting informally to discuss what we were observing. Mrs. Henderson had documented changes in her pet's behavior. Her dog would whine and pace during those same 2 a.m. episodes, while her cat would hide under the furniture. Other people reported electronic devices malfunctioning during those time periods, car alarms going off for no reason, and baby monitors picking up strange signals. When we tried to raise concerns at the next town meeting, Mayor Patterson seemed different. He dismissed our complaints with rehearsed-sounding responses about adjustment periods for new technology and coincidental timing of unrelated symptoms. His eyes kept darting to the back of the room where the same 3 agents sat, still watching and saying nothing. The breaking point came when we discovered what was happening to the Kowalski family. Their teenage son, Derek, had been acting increasingly erratic, mood swings, memory gaps, and most disturbingly, he'd started repeating phrases and opinions that didn't sound like things a 17-year-old would say. When his parents tried to question him about it, he became agitated and claimed they were interfering with important work. Mrs. Kowalski found journals in Derek's room filled with detailed observations about family routines, neighbor activities, and town politics, written in handwriting that looked like his, but containing information he shouldn't have had access to. It was like someone was using him as an unwitting surveillance asset, collecting data about the community through his daily interactions. That's when we realized the tower wasn't just causing random symptoms. It was being used to influence behavior. The timing of the signal pulses corresponded with REM sleep cycles, the periods when the brain is most susceptible to external influence.